Okay, welcome back to another author interviews at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Matthew Mercier. I hope I pronounced that right. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. And so take it away.
Hi, my name is Matthew Mercier. Mercier is the indigenous way to say it. You can say either one.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm Canadian, so I went with the French way. So,
Oh, you are
yeah.
fantastic. All right. Yeah, the French way. Yeah, that's where my ancestors are from. So yeah, Matthew Mercier. I'm a writer and storyteller. I live in the Hudson Valley, in the beautiful Hudson Valley of upstate New York. So I write psychological thrillers. I write horror. I write fairy tales. Whatever floats my boat at the moment. So right now, I'm the author of Poe and I.
Okay, so that's an excellent segue into the first question, which is give everyone an overview of your book, Poe and I.
Poe and I is loosely based on my own time as caretaker for the last home of Edgar Allan Poe, but my fictional narrator, Jonah Peabody, takes a job. He's at the end of his rope financially and emotionally. He takes a job as caretaker for the last home of Edgar Allan Poe in the Bronx. The job entails that he's a caretaker and head docent, so he has to live on the premises. He has to live in the basement of Poe's house and give tours on the weekends in order to earn free rent. So that's the setup. But the story, the novel toggles between past and present. It alternates chapters. Starts out in the present, then we go to the past, back and forth. And it quickly becomes apparent that Jonah is an unreliable narrator. There's clearly something amiss. He claims to be in the Bronx looking for his lost sister, Andromeda. But as the story progresses and we get more, as the story of his past becomes clearer, it's apparent that his motivations are far more complex than that. That's the basic gist.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character. What's his personality, and what kind of an emotional character arc does he have?
Well, as I said, he is extremely unreliable. He's pretty upfront about that. I think sophisticated readers know that a first person narration is not entirely to be trusted. And Poe, of course, pioneered the unreliable narrator. So he's pretty upfront with that he's not telling the truth, that he's going to give you the truth in bits and pieces, that you're not going to get the entire story. So he mythologizes about himself. You don't know what's true, what's not true. However, I think he's also charming and funny. I can't ask readers to follow somebody along for 350 pages if they don't think there's something at the end worthwhile. So but he's manic, he's paranoid. The opening chapter is him going to visit his bookie, who he's in debt to, and it does not go well for him. The opening chapter is quite raucous. He loses a limb, so that's all I'll say. But he starts out at the very, very bottom, and he's got nowhere to go but up. Or as he says, this is only going to get weirder as the story goes on, and indeed it does. I think he's charming. I hope other people find him charming, but he is an unreliable narrator. So that's again no secret. So
Okay, so your book deals with family secrets, with guilt, with ghosts, which sounds interesting to me, and
mhm.
it's all pulled into the history and mythos of Edgar Allan Poe. So how did you blend that all together? And did you sort of parallel the main character a little bit with Poe's actual life, or how did that work?
So yeah, let's see. The Poe, of course. I mean, the job is, again, the story is based loosely on my job as caretaker. So, and his job is to give tours of Poe's house, and so it was not too difficult to pepper in Poe mythology. There are lots of Poe Easter eggs in the narrative, and once I realized that the narrative was going to be first person, I thought, oh, well, this is essentially a Poe story. I mean, Poe's narrators, from the Telltale Heart to the Black Cat, they all are unreliable. So So it kind of turned out that the present tense is clearly unreliable, and then the stories that are told in the past are kind of like the confessional, right? He gives you a little bit more of the story. So in that way, I think it's a very Poe-like narrative. Like it just gives you bits and pieces. And in this case, though, I think you start to trust him a little more as the story gets more shades of gray. Um, but yeah, so in that way, I tried to make it reflect uh, not only Poe's stories but the mood around Poe. It's also a very melancholy and gothic tone I tried to strike. I mean, the cottage it is in a park. It's in a city park in the Bronx. So there's wind, there's rain, all the classic gothic elements. So I tried to tap into all of that, which is what I love about Poe, and obviously I think it's what people love about Poe as well. And Poe also had, I don't know if people know this, but he had a very raucous sense of humor. If you read some of his lesser known tales, he had a wild sense of humor. And I've tried to make the book also highly comic. I tried to make it like a Grady Hendrix novel at some point. Like it just has like this manic tone that, so it's that part as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. So there's that as well.
Okay, I'm curious, is the main character a fan of Poe, or is he just taking the job because it's a job?
Well, as he likes to say, he's taking it. That's a hard one to ask you. That's a good question because I mean, he's taking the job because he needs to. He's desperate, and he likes to say that life is a Poe story. He grew up. His father is a funeral director, so he's surrounded by corpses and coffins and death. So he is a Poe fan. However, his sister, the missing sister Andromeda, is more of a Poe fan. Like she's an even bigger goth. They were both goth kids growing up. So he has to, during the interview scene, like, he has to lie a little bit and say he's not, he calls himself a Poe super fan, but he's faking it till he makes it. But his life is definitely a Poe story, and that's how he sells himself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
So, what's your favorite scene without spoilers in the book?
in the book. I think I had to think about this. This was a really interesting question. And I think my favorite scene, hands down. So my villain, or my morally gray villain. I don't have any flat out villains, but he's definitely the villain of the piece. He has constructed a museum of his own in his own house. He's a rather wealthy man, and he's collected art and trophies, travel trophies, and stuff that he may have acquired by dubious means. And he's kind of insulated in this mansion of his, kind of like a gothic Hugh Hefner. He just keeps himself locked away. So building that entire house, that weird collection of artifacts, was incredibly fun. It doesn't appear until much later in the book, but so that was fun to create. Like, what would this man have in his house? Um, it was also fun to recreate my own job as caretaker. I had to give these tours every weekend, so it was fun to recreate the cottage itself and think about that space and the scenes with Poe's ghost. Poe, shows up himself. So I always wondered like what Poe would think of me narrating his life. So making those scenes come alive was a great deal of fun. So no spoilers there. Poe's ghost is in the book, along with many others. So
Yeah, I bet being a caretaker in the real life job, not the fictional
yeah.
version, was kind of interesting. Did it ever feel spooky or kind of gothic when you're doing the tours, or is it just like, yeah, this is just a house?
Well, it depended on the guest. Well, during the day, the Bronx was like any other part of the New York. Like it was bright sunshine, and at night it would get, the park was, I called it, or my wife called it, the gated community of one. It was in a city park, and so I'd come home, a locked gate surrounding the property. I was the only one with the keys, and there was a giant oak tree in the backyard, which plays into the novel. And so it was a very strange atmosphere. I'd get off the subway, walk up the city block, and then there would be this little oasis that I had all to myself. And then I'd crawl into the basement of a house where a man who wrote stories about murder, like, it lived for many years. So it was it was a very gothic existence. So during the, in the witching hour, I'd wake up sometimes and I thought I would hear noises, and I only had one window. So I didn't have much sunlight. So I became very pale. I had long hair. People said I started to look like Poe after a while. So I don't know if I took on the persona, but then people would show up on the weekends, and sometimes they wanted me to play up the ghostly angle. And so sometimes I would just perform and tell people what they wanted to hear. And, but I did adopt I became very feral looking after a while, because the job was, you know, didn't pay very well. So just space out my haircuts and stuff. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So, what was the hardest scene for you to write in the book?
The hardest scenes. So the flashback, well, the scenes that take place in the past, the childhood scenes with as Jonah reveals more of his life, those deal a lot in emotional violence, mental illness. So some scenes of mental illness, and they do not reflect my life. My fictional narrator is completely separated from me, but those were incredibly difficult because I wanted to get them right, and I know they will likely be triggering for some folks, but I had to go through it. I had to write Jonah's story in such a way that was honest and depicted it in an honest way. So those easily were the most difficult because I had to get the details and the emotion right. Yeah.
So what's the hardest part of writing fiction in general for you? And what were some of the challenges you faced in writing the novel?
Well, in general, I find endings very difficult. I don't think I'm alone in that. Endings,
No, no, you're not.
no, right? Yeah.
I get that answer a lot from authors.
I don't know what it is. Beginnings are easy, coming up with the idea, but then the follow through, I kind of end up pulling like a Return of the King. I have too many endings after a while and just kind of like pile it on, and I have to stop at some point. I have to be disciplined. So I find the endings difficult. I find getting the psychological motivations of the characters, making sure that makes sense logically. Like, I don't want characters to act out of character. So making sure that is logical. But then with Poe and I specifically, the hardest part was staying in first person, being disciplined enough to stay in Jonah's voice and Jonah's head. It was I wanted to, hop from perspective to perspective, but you obviously can't with first person. So, and you have to maintain the voice. So for my next book work, I'm not, first person is only for a short story occasionally. But for now, first person is in the rearview mirror because it's so hard and so difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult to stay in first person. I find a lot of times in first person, I find myself slipping tenses.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the
es-
time. It's
Yeah,
so
because I mean, I don't write first person too much in novels. I've done it a couple of times, but I do a lot of flash fiction and I
uh,
write first person a lot there, and I find myself slipping tenses all the time. So
all the
yeah.
time. I'm glad I'm not alone. I feel seen. That is such a difficult thing to do. And when I read it back, yeah, you proofread. You're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So,
Yeah. So what do you enjoy most about writing?
oh, I love the feeling. Well, I fill up notebooks in the beginning. When I have an idea, I go crazy, and I'm not committed to anything. So I can just fill up notebooks with ideas and characters and scenes. I love building a scene or a set piece. I try to think of it as a cinematic terms. I try to think of like blocking out scenes and the physical, what's in that space. I love building the scenes and creating those scenes and then having them completed. I don't like just coming up with ideas. Like once the scene is completed and I can see that it works and it flows, I love that. I love building something from nothing. It used to be so hard uh, doing that just initially, but now that I've been writing for quite a while, I've got a bit more of a instinct on how to do that. But I just love creating a scene in a world. I love fantasy too. So I love world building. I love And I think you can apply world building to any. Doesn't have to be fantasy, but I just love building it out, um, and building it out of the yeah, just keep going. I used to do short stories especially, but now I find myself just expanding things exponentially, and I can't stop. And so that's what for a novel, that's what you need to do. So I've taught myself how to just keep building and building and building, and then I have to cut.
Yeah, yeah, eventually we have to edit them, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we cannot be George Martin. We all can't be like these giant tomes, and you have to cut at some
Mm.
point. So yeah,
So, why did you decide to write in the horror genre?
this was a good question too. I don't. I think this is going to sound really pretentious, but I think the horror genre chose me. I think I circled back to it after some time away. I came through an MFA program, and they didn't discourage genre writing per se, but if I submitted something that was weird, it wasn't given as much attention as what you might call literary. So, but I think what I love specifically about horror is it can be a bit punk rock and impolite, and you can explore ideas that are impolite or ideas that are transgressive that may not fit in, say, the romance genre or the fantasy genre. I think horror can encompass all of those genres. I think horror is a huge umbrella. My book is more psychological thriller ghost story. It's not a splatterpunk. It's not an extreme horror, but those genre. Those genres within the horror genre, like splatterpunk, and are perfectly are wonderful. But I just love the umbrella of horror. I just got back from StokerCon last month, and I was amazed at how many different people write horror from all different backgrounds.
Mm.
And it's a wonderful time to be part of the horror community because you have people from all walks of life. And I don't know if you see that in other genres. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, maybe I'm overestimating that, but
Well, I've seen a lot of I do see a lot of I think the variety in horror is more than other genres. You do get a little bit of that in fantasy,
yeah,
um, because you've got so many subgenres in fantasy, like, you've got a lot of subgenres in romance, but it's and I don't mean any disrespect to romance authors because I think they're great,
fantastic.
but it's basically the same idea across genres. You got the 2 love interests, they fall in love happily ever after.
It has to
And
be a happy ending, right? There's
yeah, has to be happily ever after, happily ever now, or it's not romance.
interesting.
That's the one and hard fast rule in romance, you cannot break it.
You cannot break it. Yeah.
No,
I love
but
horror because you can break the rules.
yeah, yeah, I mean, you can break rules in romance too, but you romance fans will pretty much riot if you do not give them their happy ending, so
Interesting. Interesting. Do you write romance? Is it?
no, I don't. I do
Oh,
that is the one thing I do not write. I can write it, I don't like writing it. I don't know, it's just I just don't feel comfortable writing it for some reason. I mean, but
mhm.
I know a lot of romance authors, so I know a lot about romance.
I've been learning a lot about romance recently and the history of the romance genre, and
Mm,
it is fascinating.
yeah,
Um, I do write about love. There is a lot of love in this in Poe and I.
yeah,
Not, but Poe had a very different take on love.
yeah.
So-
Most of my love stories end badly, generally with one of the people dead, so this is why I don't write romance.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't fit quite into. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think if I wrote a romance novel, it would end. People would riot because I
Mm,
don't know. Love takes all different forms, and
yeah.
yeah, that's funny.
Okay, who are some of your favorite authors since we're talking about multiple genres here?
Oh, who's my favorite? It's I. Well, my favorite writer of all time, I think, would be Ursula K. Le Guin.
Oh, yeah, she's great. Love her.
She's fantastic. No, I'm sitting right beneath my fantasy shelf. I have like the Collected Earthsea. I don't know if you ever
Mm,
seen. Yeah, she is. She's my queen. She's or my master, I should say. Uh, yeah, I have every book she's ever written. I've read everything she's ever. I just heard they turned her house into a writing residency, so I would
Oh,
go there. For horror, like Stephen Graham Jones, of course, is the master right now. I discovered him early on, right before he blew up, and so I was thrilled that he's now having a moment. I love a gentleman named Jess Walter. He's out in Spokane, Washington, I think, and he writes incredibly funny books. So I read him. He writes like crime novels that have a Coen brother esque feel to them. So I read him to learn how to write comic scenes that include violence and that don't get too dark. So yeah, I have. But man, I read so much that. But Ursula K. Le Guin is. I read her every year. I read the Earthsea books every year. I read The Dispossessed and The Left Hand of Darkness
mm.
pretty much every 2 years. Have you read The Left Hand of Darkness
Yeah,
before?
I have. My favorite of hers is one of her more obscure books. It's called The Lathe of Heaven.
Oh, sure. Oh, The Dream. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. It was trippy. It's a good word. Yeah, it's a really good word to put, but it made you think. I think that's why I liked it so much because you read that book and you come away and you're still thinking about it like weeks
Oh,
afterwards.
yeah. I mean, I am convinced that the culture has taken a lot of ideas from Le Guin. The word for world. What's the title? I'm going to blank on the title. Oh no, yeah. The word for world is forest. Have you read that one?
No, I have not read that one. I
That's
haven't read all of her stuff. I'm still working through her books.
yeah. I'm convinced that James Cameron borrowed that. Avatar is basically that novel. So I don't know. I mean, we know Harry Potter and Earthsea, like the Wizard School, like
Mm,
that's a lot of it. But yeah, no, she. I'm so glad that she is most likely going to live forever. She seems like she's going to, you know, outlive a lot of us. But her work is right up there with Tolkien,
mm,
and the rest. Yeah,
yeah, definitely. So, what do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies or hidden talents?
I live in the woods, and I live in. I do a lot of hiking. Writing is so sedentary, as you know,
Yeah,
we're sitting down so much. So I need physical activity desperately. As soon as I'm done writing, I get up, I go outside, chop some wood, clear some invasive plants in the backyard, call up my buddy, we go for a hike in the Catskills. Anything that gets my blood moving. I take a lot of backpacking trips in the wilderness. I'm trying to plan one right now. So yeah, I also do a lot of live storytelling. I don't know if you're familiar with a group called The Moth.
no.
Yeah, they do. He performs stories on stage in front of an audience without notes. You're not allowed to read anything off your paper. So yeah, you do a lot of yeah. So there's storytelling shows around in the Hudson Valley, so you can just go and perform a story. So it's not quite. It's not like stand up comedy, but it's you can make people laugh. So I started doing that about 2009 and learned that I didn't have any problem performing in front of a group of an audience. So it was the closest I'll ever come to being a
Yeah,
stand-up comic or an actor. So
yeah, it sounds a little bit like live theater, a little improv almost in it.
yeah, yeah. Although people were encouraged to like memorize,
Yeah,
not to improv too much but you do feed off the energy of the audience.
but I'm assuming that once in a while people do forget the lines in
Oh, I
what you're d
I, I have forgotten my
yeah,
lines before. Oh yes, it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling, humbling, but it's a great deal of fun, and it gets you out of your isolation as a writer. When I started doing it, I loved it, and it gave me a community of people who I am still friends with to this day. So, yeah, I highly encourage people to check out the Moth and the live storytelling scene because it's a great way to build community. And I mean, everyone's, there's people are. I mean, they may not be novelists, but they are writers. They are
mhm,
people who take a story from A to B. So, yeah, that was a great skill to discover. Yeah.
okay. So you mentioned writing some short stories and things, so tell us a little bit about some of the other stuff you've written.
So, well, it's mostly. Yeah, I've published short stories. I wrote an essay on Margaret Hamilton that appeared in the Fairy Tale Review a while back. But Poe and I is really my first major piece of writing that will be out there. So I'm thrilled that Crystal Lake and Joe Meinhardt are publishing it. The Moth stories are online. Those are, you can go to the website and find those. A lot of the stories that I've told live are out there on the internet to be found. So that's those stories, and the short stories are hard to find these days. I mean, journals go defunct,
Well, that's true.
websites are go extinct. So hopefully I'll be able to collect them all in a single book. But so yeah, I'm thrilled that now that I've fallen in love with the long form, I think I'll probably do more longer books. But yeah, the short stories are out there. My website has links to some of them, essays, nonfiction. I've done a lot of small stuff, but
Okay, so do you have a next project coming up? And can you tell us any tidbits if you do?
so I'm working on a novella right now that is about sex and pornography.
Well, there's a teaser, I tell you.
The male gaze, trying to reckon with that. I think we've reached a crucial tipping point with the internet and pornography. It's like absolutely insane how it's mainstream now. So I think a lot about that. And so it's completely different tact from Poe and I. But I'm also working on a new novel that is it's becoming a raucous satire that is also. Are you familiar with the work of Percival Everett?
No, no.
He writes satirical novels about race in America. So it's kind of like a satirical novel about race meets Lovecraft. So like Victor Laval, if you read Victor Laval's work, his stuff is like goes right up to the edge of satire. But so yeah, something along that vein. So that's where I'm going right now.
Yeah,
If
well, both of those projects sound interesting for entirely different reasons. But there's something readers can look forward to, I guess, I
would
suppose.
you read those? I mean, those sound like yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, they both do kind of sound interesting. So yeah, I probably would. But then again, I read a lot of stuff. So anyway, so I think we'll wrap the interview up here. And I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
You too. Yeah.
Okay, and you can find Poe and I linked in the description along with the website. And that's all for now. So bye.
Bye bye.